Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Returning violence for violence only multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars." In the present, we are more and more becoming a part of that darkness, at a time when we as Americans should be the light, leading the way towards peace and prosperity. Yet, over the past decade, the United States has involved itself in treacherous military incursions, lost thousands of lives across the globe, and continued deeper into this spiral of violence and hate. And despite repeated disappointment, we continue to hold on to the notion that somehow our nation's problems and that the world's problems can be solved by the mighty hand of the American military and violence. Today, I will use the four-way test of Rotary to advocate the desperate need to find nonviolent solutions to our nation's international entanglements. So starting with the first question, is it the truth? And any conversation about American foreign policy over the past 10 years will be dominated by two things. One, the war on terror, and two, the struggle to achieve sustainable peace in the Middle East. And looking back, it's sad to say that while the U.S. did manage to reform oppressive regimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, we failed to achieve the larger goal. We failed to root out the violence and terror that will continue to plague that region for generations. And no matter how strong our army is, and no matter how hard we work, the results will continue to disappoint unless we change our method. We have to move away from violent responses towards nonviolent solutions. We saw President Carter in the late 70s engineer a peaceful solution between the Egyptians and the Israelis, a conflict that matches in fervor and magnitude any of the disputes we see today. And we should look to President Carter's example not just because it worked at that moment, but because it is a long-term solution. It's the type of solution that breeds sustainable peace. So we see with this point that the truth is that this change is not only possible, it's entirely necessary. So moving on to our second question, is it fair to all concerned? The death toll for Americans in this war on terror was unacceptable, intolerable. And the shift in policy I advocate today is the only foreign policy that would be fair to America, the only foreign policy that ensures that we no longer commit ourselves to this strategy that bred over 6,000 deaths in an unwinnable war on terror. And I mentioned the number 6,000 there with purpose. And it's because foreign policy in our country has become so much of an abstraction. And for much of my life, it was an abstraction until I met my friend David. David's father is a veteran. He was in the Gulf War and he was severely injured. And David told me how it affected his life, that his father couldn't throw around the football with him. He couldn't make it to all the basketball games, and he couldn't come on all the college visits. And if that wasn't enough, David proceeded to tell me that his brother was killed in action during the Iraq War. And at that point, it became so concrete to me that foreign policy is anything but an abstraction, anything but vague. Those soldiers who come home injured or are buried in Arlington are our mothers and our fathers, they're our sons and our daughters. And we hold a firm obligation to their memories, to strive to the best of our abilities to achieve the fair solution. We have to seek the nonviolent solution. And there's a larger and more critical fairness, however, and that's towards the international community. Nonviolent action by the United States, like at those Camp David Accords, has helped build towards creating a safe, stable, and free global community. And looking forward, one issue that's expected to be pressing over the next few years is with the Palestinians. And in that conflict, we cannot allow ourselves to be deliberately provoked into creating an unfair, militant solution. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is extraordinarily complex. The toxic blend of religion, suspicion, and hate is certainly one that cannot be solved by means of militant force. The only way to bring about peace in that region, to end a seemingly perpetual cycle of violence and hate, is to negotiate, to use not our guns, but our words. Violence is simply a means to suppress hate. Negotiations and diplomacy is how you change hate and how you end it. And so we see with this point that this change is fair to both the United States and to that international community. So moving on to our third question, is it beneficial to all concerned? And it's simple to label American foreign policy as the pursuit to reach relations that benefit us alone, we as a singular nation. However, this myopic view cannot be applied today. We live in a global community, and we can't change that. We live in a global community, and we should act like it. The decision to move away from violent responses towards peaceful solutions is beneficial to all concerned, to all within that global community. And looking forward, the United States is also all too likely to face an enormous conflict with Iran. Iran is growing more and more dangerous, more and more hostile, and the repercussions of military action against them would be grave. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates remarked that, quote, "Any military attack against Iran would only buy us time and drive their nuclear program deeper and more covert," end quote. And it's also important to note that the Iranian military is massive, complex, and disciplined. Their nuclear program has been declared a credible threat by the United Nations. The United States, if we choose to take military action, would be throwing our troops smack dab in the middle of a reckless, first world nuclear army that has no moral code. However, if we do what President Obama is striving to do, if we bring the Iranians to the table, we can negotiate an equitable agreement. We can have the opportunity to usher in safety and peace for a region that has been all too foreign to for all too long. And so we see here that it is beneficial to the United States because it's in our best interest to exist in a safe and stable global community, and it's beneficial to that global community because sustainable solutions are worthwhile solutions. And so, moving into our final question, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And with this point, we must notice that there's been two facets to this talk today, and that's the American side and the international side. And on the American side, we've seen that when we show restraint, when we seek the nonviolent solution, we help build towards that safe, stable, and free global community. But when we seek the violent response, we only serve to elongate that senseless cycle of violence around the globe. And on the international side, we see that these nonviolent solutions breed goodwill and better friendships between and within nations. So the product of all of this change turns out to be two things: goodwill and better friendships. And so, in conclusion, when we look back at what Dr. King said, that returning violence for violence only multiplies violence, we're reminded that it is time for a change in this country. Never has it been more important to reevaluate American foreign policy so that it's beneficial to all, so that it is fair to all, so that it builds goodwill and better friendships around the globe. And the truth is that the only way for Americans to lead the charge towards that peace is through nonviolent solutions. Thank you.